Brent, thank you very much for being here. I know you've been in a lot of critical POCs. You've seen and heard firsthand about what customers are saying out there, what they'd like to automate, what their pain points are, what their challenges are. Just before we begin, I'd like to throw out sort of like this, this number of what analysts and what the market is saying. Right, IT has evolved from having to support applications and workloads on premises to a combination. So they have now cloud, multi-cloud in some cases, right? So it just makes it so much more complex. So when there is a request, it's not just about provisioning the resource, it's about all of the other stuff that happens or that goes with that resource provisioning. So I know leaders and practitioners, they are, I guess it's suffice to say that it's not straightforward, right? And Gartner predicts that 70% of enterprises will be ready for this challenge, and they will be ready by implementing automation. So I want to kind of get your thoughts on this, Brent. So, it's like I said, resource provisioning is not as simple as it sounds. It's just, there's so many moving parts to it. Can you kind of walk us through some of the challenges and the complexity involved?
Yeah, I mean, you've called out a couple of things already, the differences between on-premise and the cloud environment as well. But the reality is that it's a huge multi-step process, right? Think about when a customer or one of your users wants to have that very first interaction with you at the very, very beginning of that end-to-end process. It's probably going to be something like a service request through your ITSM portal or something like that, maybe through a web form. Mm-hmm. And they're going to specify some of the basics, right? Like the application or the server name, and then some of the more technical specifications, maybe like the server performance requirements. Maybe the environment you want to build is a multi-server environment or a multi-location build. Maybe there's servers on-premise, there's servers in the cloud, different types of servers, different types of operating systems. And from this point forwards, IT may want to perform some sort of pre-validation checks. For example, which data center is the server going into, or the multiple servers going into? Which sort of hypervisor? Is there enough data store space? Do we need to reserve a contiguous range of IP addresses for these sorts of services? And now maybe we can start actually provisioning the server now, or multiple servers in parallel if that's what's required. Eventually, the server post-install configuration needs to take place. And maybe you've already have a tool to accomplish part of this already. So there needs to be a way to integrate and trigger that off as well. Maybe additional applications need to be installed too. And there's a lot of work that gets done at the stage, right? And finally, right, after all those changes have been done and the server's been built and the DNS changes are there, the firewall rules have been put in place by the network team and other teams have done their bit, someone needs to contact that user to let them know that the server process or provisioning has been completed, and of course, how to connect to it. And of course, the small bugbear for IT folks like myself, documentation and other paperwork, asset registers, CMDB updates. These right. are all sorts of things that need to be done as well, that sometimes can be forgotten about. And of course, that can be automated as well, so that the user gets what they want when they need it. That's probably enough for now, right?
It reminds me of this. It reminds me of this iceberg graphic that we've used so much. It's funny, like from a marketing perspective, when I put in that service request and I ask for a resource, I just see maybe the top of the iceberg, and there is this huge set of things that needs to take place, which is really your process, and it's really invisible. So yeah, and I think you did a great job painting for us what really has to happen to provision a resource. And from your conversations, we do realize that a lot of folks are doing this manually today, right? What do you think are some of the challenges that we hear from customers, who are doing this manually today?
Yeah, I mean, resource provisioning is not just server provisioning like I just referred to, right?
Right.
It could be network link or a new network configuration service, firewall rules. I mean, there's plenty of different types of provisioning. I'm just sort of focusing on the server one today, but there's tasks and processes that need to be completed by other external teams, and they can add a huge delay into your average response time. And these other teams may already have scripts or other technology specific tools to complete their individual task. So that should be able to be automatically triggered, right? But
Right.
these tools, they refer to, they're not really interconnected. And this is where orchestration can be your friend and help make some serious transformational changes in your business. In addition to the steps I talked about earlier, of course, there's the big one, simple human error, what do they call it? Fat finger mistakes, mostly small, unnoticeable keyboard errors right at the beginning. And of course, they play out and cause some problems later on. That's why those pre-validation checks that I originally talked about are very, very important.
Right.
And of course, I'll repeat it again, the documentation, the paperwork, the asset registers, CMDB updates. Again, this can be a real challenge in the real world for keeping everything up to date.
Right. And given that we're in this economy where we have this instant gratification, when you submit your IT ticket as a external stakeholder, I expect that it will be done, right? And I have no idea what's happening in the background, and I just want my resource. So I think staying on their SLAs, all of that stuff can be much easily achieved with automation.
Yeah, I mean, look, updating the users during the process of that server provisioning, in this case, is very, very important.
Right.
We obviously don't need to give them all the steps of what's happening, but at least keeping them up to date. That communication is so important. Yeah.
Right. Right. So, I mean, what are we going to, I wanted to kind of distill this down into a process, like an example. Can you walk us through some of the automations or some of the workflows you have helped automate? I believe I have one such workflow here.
Yeah, I thought the best thing would be really starting something quite basic, right? Provisioning a VMware server, and really you want to be looking at the complete end-to-end process again. So when we think about what automation is, it's not just about provisioning the server. There's a trigger point somewhere right at the beginning, and that may be a user going into their ITSM self-service portal and filling out a form, or even using Resolve's form builder as well to get that data into the system. Once that data is in the system, we then go into those initiation and pre-checks. Can we actually do what the user wants to do? How complicated is it? What sort of pre-checks do we need to do to make sure that we can actually provision the server? And of course, they can all be automated, right? Making sure that the ESX host in this case has enough data store space, making sure we've got enough IP addresses, reserving those IP addresses in advance if we're using static IPs, and so forth and so on. And then, of course, provisioning the actual server, again, whether it be Windows, Linux, or some other operating system, and reconfiguring the environment to suit what the user originally asked for, and all those post-install configurations that I talked about earlier. And then resolution, all those sorts of updates during the build of that process should be updated back in that ITSM tool and automatically notifying the user that we are working through the process. There's nothing being stalled here. And if this whole process is automated from that service request, the user should get their server within 5-10 minutes, right? That's what it should take. That's how long it should take when you've got automation involved.
Right. Right. So much more easier to meet SLAs. I can't imagine having to do all of this manually. So I guess this is a great segue for us into our demo section. I'm going to stop share here and let you kind of just give us a glimpse of what an automation in Resolve for resource provisioning would look like.
Okay. So what we're going to do is start off with a well-known ITSM tool that you may have heard of before. This tool has a portal where users can self-service different items and things like that. And I'm just going to click on the service catalog item here to order a new VMware instance. So I can type in the name of this particular server and choose the operating system and all these sorts of things that would specify the prereqs for our environment. Noticing I'm not getting too much into the technical detail just to begin with, but this is all the things we need to do just to order a Windows 2019 server in this case. So I'm going to click on order now, and that's going to create that request item within ServiceNow, and we can have a look at the status of for our environment. Noticing I'm not getting too much into the technical detail just to begin with. Good. Okay. So now we're looking at the request item, and the request item again has all those variables, and this is connected with Resolve. In fact, Resolve has already received this information and is already starting to build the server. And if we scroll down, you can start to see the activities or the notifications that are going to be sent out to that user. The automation has already started here, and it's already starting to build the server and do those pre-checks. So let's have a look at some of the things behind the scenes of while that's building. This is Resolve Actions Pro, and Resolve Actions Pro allows you to design automations to meet your own requirements. And it's quite as simple as just dragging and dropping different things into the correct order here in order to build that sort of process, and then linking them together. Now, these tasks can be API calls, they can be scripts that you may be using today in an unadulterated fashion. There may be commands that are being run within an SSH session. It can be practically anything, and Resolve can integrate with almost anything that's got a digital footprint. If it's got an IP address, then we could probably automate with it. But there's a lot of this pre-built content, these things called action tasks, or activities that we've already created for all of our organizations, all our customers. And most of the tier 1 and tier 2 vendors, we've already got you sorted there and built a lot of things out. In fact, we have thousands of these action tasks and thousands of templates that are already being built up to help you hit the ground running. And it's not just VMware, right? You can also build up automations with AWS, GCP, Azure, OpenStack, all those different types of systems as well. This is just another example here of building a very simple instance in AWS EC2. There's an action task here to create the instance. We wait for that instance to start, and then we describe the instance, and then we can send an email off to those the people who created it. But let's have a look at our automation. We have a front end for an automation. I talked about being able to trigger these automations from ServiceNow or your ITSM tool, but you can also build up front end pages for your automations as well. And you can see here the similar sorts of information that we just entered in when we went into ServiceNow. We can do the same thing here in Resolve, but behind the scenes is the automation. And this is the automation or the workflow that makes up this process. And these are things that you can download from Resolve's Automation Exchange. This particular automation here is all about creating a VMware guest. So within here, we'd be able to start the process here, which is triggered automatically from ServiceNow or that form. And you can see just really by looking at it, what's going on. The really first step here is, have we started from ServiceNow? If we did, we follow this green good arrow here, and we add a request note into ServiceNow to say, yep, we've started that automation. And that's what you saw when we were in ServiceNow to begin with. Then we're going through some of these pre-validation steps. Where do we want the VMware server to be located? Is it in production environment or DR? And of course, you can add more environments into this by modifying these templates. Okay, let's check if the VMware already exists with the same name. Let's check the data store space, and then clone eventually from a template. Once that cloning is completed, we then go into a loop to wait for that VMware to get built or provisioned or cloned. And then we're going to configure that VMware using that information that we had provided from ServiceNow. In fact, if I go over to my vCenter environment, here we go, you can see that's my clone. It's 49% of the way there. Brent test 54, that's the server that we created. So it's happening. I don't know if it'll be finished by the time we've got for the today, but
So
it will get there, I think.
Couple of things I think you mentioned really kind of hit the mark for me is you said there's a self-service portal, which so Resolve, I guess there's a flexibility to either create your own self-service portal, which you might want to expose to your organization, or through an ITSM tool. So there's flexibility on how you want to expose the automation. And also, I think you mentioned you covered the complexity pieces where whether it's on premise or in the cloud, the user doesn't care and the user doesn't have to know. He's just going to pick his options, and then the automation would get kicked off.
Exactly. But you can see during the process here, there's always little steps here to say, did we start from ServiceNow? Let's go and go and update ServiceNow. Further down in the automation here, are we building a Linux or a Windows server?
Right.
And again, just by looking.
You could have those built out as complex as you want and have as many decision points as you want.
Exactly. I mean, just an example here, if we're building a Windows server, which is what we're doing today, we're going to follow this path down here, and we're going to set a static IP address, some registry values for a legal notice, and then eventually join the computer to the domain. Now, we know that there are other tools on the market, for example, that Microsoft provides that can do this sort of thing as well. And obviously Resolve can do these sorts of things, but Resolve in this instance is vendor agnostic. It means that we can integrate with all these different types of tools, but more importantly, you can build the process according to what you want, rather than what some vendor dictates to you and makes available to you. So with Resolve, you've got full control of building your own process and doing exactly what you want to do as part of your workflow.
Right. And I think we have 2 minutes left. So I want to make sure to kind of just touch upon this. And here in this example, you're using a server, right? But this can go as complex as you want it. It could be application environments, for example.
Exactly. I mean, the team here at Resolve have built out some amazing data-driven deployment automations. One that I've seen very, very recently was about deploying a SAP environment. It involves something like 6 or 7 servers of varying specifications, with different types of applications, different types of OS configuration. Because they're Linux, they require a little bit more fine tuning. And being able to deploy those SAP environments from a data-driven form, like you saw at the beginning here, and just front end all that away, so that the user can say, yep, I need an SAP environment, I need this type of specification with these plugins, these add-ons, and just simply selecting that from a drop-down box. It's so powerful. And again, something that would take potentially days, if not a week to build, can be built and provisioned within minutes using Resolve. Right. Well, maybe an hour, right? It is SAP. It might take a long.
Well, we're at the top of our time. So Brent, I want to thank you for being here. And I want to make sure to remind our users that folks who've joined today, if you like the demo, please be here next week. We're going to continue this with our Automation 5. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Brent, for that engaging discussion. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye. Thank you.